Hey, welcome to Plant Yourself. I'm your host, Howard Jacobson. Two quick announcements before we get to today's show. If you're interested in becoming a health coach, I'm offering another run due to popular demand for people who can't make 8 p.m. on Wednesday nights, Eastern Time. So we're doing another run of the program, which will meet, the practicums will meet at 10 a.m. on Wednesdays, Eastern Time, U.S., which means if you're in Europe or Africa, that might be good for you. Also, if you're in the U.S. and evenings aren't good and you have free time in the mornings, either 7 a.m. Pacific time or 10 to 11:30 Eastern, then you can participate. If you want to find out more about becoming a wicked effective health coach, you can go to wellstartcoach.com. Second thing is, if you're not aware of it, Josh Lajani and I have a book that is free on Amazon Kindle. It's called Sick to Fit. And if you just go to Amazon and search for Sick to Fit, you'll be able to download it for free and read it on any Kindle-enabled device, even a phone, smartphone, tablet, computer, whatever. All right, let's get to today's episode. This is the Plant Yourself podcast. I'm Howard Jacobson of plantyourself.com, WellStart Health, and Sick to Fit. This podcast is part of my mission to help you live an energetic and embodied life. So today's guest is someone that I have been fanboying over for years. It's Kelly McGonigal, and she is one of my favorite science, personal development, psychology teachers and writers. I've got, I think, all her books, and they're all in different sections of my library. There's the Habits and Behavioral Science one, The Willpower Instinct. There's Stress, The Upside of Stress, and her latest work, The Joy of Movement, Exercise and Movement. She also has an amazing audio course available on Audible or through Sounds True. It's called The Science of Self-Compassion, and that is both a scientific tour de force and a big-hearted hug from a caring friend. And it occurred to me that if I talk too much about what's in the interview, I might actually be discouraging you from listening just by taking up so much time. You're here, you're probably going to listen. So all I just want to say is that this book, The Joy of Movement, is both a work of science and a love letter to the human body and the human spirit. And we'll get to it in just a second. A couple of quick announcements. First, we are just about closed for New Orleans. We don't really have spaces available unless you are in the city and don't need lodging, and then we can talk. You can check out sicktofit.com/NOLA, lowercase N-O-L-A. But we do have space. We've just opened up enrollment for the Sick to Fit retreat in North Carolina beginning of June. I believe that's the 4th through the 7th. You can find that at sicktofit.com/NC. Second thing, I have 2 openings for coaching clients, for laser coaching clients for February 2020. That's this month. And if you want to find out more about my signature laser coaching laser coaching program, you can check that out at plantyourself.com/laser, all lowercase L-A-S-E-R. It's a program, not a problem, I promise. And finally, WellStart Health is opening up enrollment. This is the first time in a little while. We have opened up public enrollment and not just to California health plans or private companies. And that starts on February 10th. And you can find out more and enroll at wellstarthealth.com. Just click around. You'll find it. If not, write to me and I'll tell our web developer to make it clearer. You can write to me at hj@plantyourself.com if you have questions. WellStart's a 12-week program. Josh and I do the majority of the video coaching, but we also have dietitians, doctors, lots of other coaches, including many people who have been amazing and inspiring guests on this podcast. And if you would like to reverse or halt chronic disease and get to a lean, healthy weight and become an athlete, I highly recommend the WellStart Health experience. Again, wellstarthealth.com. One last thing, I've decided to double the output of this podcast by adding a Friday podcast, which is just me basically narrating the week's newsletter. It's something about healthy habits, about how to live a better life. So it's not interview, it's shorter. The last one I just did on this past Friday was about 15 minutes. So they'll be that length. And it's just a way for people who may not have time to read to be able to listen to what I write on a commute. And if you like it and you'd like to encourage me to keep doing more publication, one way to do that is to become a patron, a supporter, a financial supporter of Plant Yourself. And you can do that by going to patreon.com and just searching for Plant Yourself and become an ongoing monthly contributor. All right, let's get to today's amazing conversation about movement. Without further ado, Dr. Kelly McGonigal, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I'm
so happy to be talking to you. I have been following your published career since they turned into books. And one of the games I play with authors that I like is try to predict what they're going to do next, sort of a trajectory game. And this your latest book, The Joy of Movement, kind of took me by surprise in just the best way. So I think maybe we could start by just kind of introducing yourself to folks who don't know you and kind of give us a sense of what you do, what you're interested in, and the arc of your research.
Sure. So I'm a mind-body psychologist. I'm interested in the mind-body connection, how our emotions influence our health, how social relationships are important to our well-being. And I've studied everything from, what's the best way to deal with anger in terms of how it affects your heart and your immune system, to what are ways that people can increase their compassion and empathy for others as well as themselves. And as you mentioned, so I've written a bunch of books, and all of my books are based on courses that I've taught. So the Willpower Instinct was based on a course I taught called The Science of Willpower, which is really just a response to the fact that so many people told me that they had trouble making positive choices to support their health because they felt like they didn't have any willpower. So I was like, well, science can help. So I wrote a book about it, and I taught a course about it first. The Upside of Stress was based on a course I taught on the new science of stress and how to live well with stress, because I wanted to share insights from neuroscience and psychology that says there are ways that you can think about stress, respond to stress, that really reduce the harmful impact that it has on your health and your happiness. So I basically think of myself as out there trying to share science that helps people be happier and healthier and strengthens communities. And so this new book, for me, it's not so much like what's next. It's more what's been in my heart for the past 2 decades. And finally, my publisher sort of relented and said, okay, you can write about this thing that you are so passionate about, which is movement and exercise, because I started teaching yoga and dance and group fitness when I was 22 years old. So I've been teaching for 20 years, started when I was a graduate student in psychology. And I quickly realized that exercise is one of the absolute best things you can do for your mental health. It's a marvelous way to form friendships and build community. And so this is the book that looks at the science of why. And I guess I'm glad I caught you by surprise in a positive way.
Yeah, well, I mean, you write in your books a lot about the courses that birthed them, right? So yeah. I found myself really jealous of your students. Because I just saw somebody posted a meme on Facebook that said, I'm so glad that I learned in school how to calculate the area of a parallelogram instead of doing my taxes, because it comes in so handy during parallelogram season. And I'm just thinking about, to me, to have learned about how to deal with willpower and impulse control to get the results I want out of life, or to be able to handle stress in a positive and generative way. I didn't come across anything like that. And I can see why these courses are among the most popular that are offered.
And let's be honest, I teach what I want to learn too. So, I know the science because I'm out there looking for answers to my own experiences too. So that's one of the great privileges of, getting to do the work that I do, is I can ask the questions like, what would support my own well-being too? What do I want to learn more about? Figure it out. And I think of my students as being a tremendous resource for me, because I learned so much about what works for other people, other minds, other bodies, other lived experiences. And some of my early, the beta testers of some of those early courses, I mean, they would tell me when a scientific idea was interesting and it just did not work when they tried to apply it in their own lives. So my students, I'm grateful to my students too.
Right. It certainly felt like, at least, in the first two books, the Willpower Instinct and the Upside of Stress, that you were giving us exercises at the end of the chapter that had been stress tests. That they were better because you had all these guinea pigs in your classes to see what worked.
Absolutely, yeah. And I love sharing those stories too. My latest book, I went beyond my own students, of course, but to be able to share some of the things that I've witnessed about how movement has changed people's lives as well. So they stress test it for me, and they also, share experiences that I often find inspiring and moving.
Yeah, and I've, you talked about like just the joy of talking to someone and having them tell you that moment when they had a transcendent experience through exercise or movement, and like
oh my gosh,
go ahead.
Like yes, them being in tears, me being in tears. So I'm sure your audience is like, what is she talking about? Can I just share just a couple of examples,
please?
So I think of like the people in my book. Often I found them by putting out some message somewhere that said, I want to talk to somebody who loves like CrossFit and it's changed their life, or I want to talk to someone who loves running or dancing or yoga. And people would often self-select and reach out to me and say, well, I have a story. And it would be stories like one woman, this is such an incredible story. She was so depressed. She felt so isolated in her life that she actually had a plan to take her own life. And she decided to go to the gym for one last workout. And when she was doing her workout, she ended up deadlifting more weight than she'd ever been able to lift before, in a sort of shocking personal best feat of strength. And in that moment that she was literally lowering the barbell and sensing her own strength, a strength that surprised her, she decided that she wanted to live and she wanted to see how strong she could become. Like stories like that, or, the story of another woman who talked about feeling just frustrated and down on herself while she was running a race in Hawaii. And she got to the top of this hill and there was this amazing view. And she heard the voice of her grandfather telling her to appreciate life and be grateful. And she starts running down the hill, repeating the words, thank you, thank you. She's so filled with awe and wonder and gratitude for life. I think that often the stories that touched me were these amazing moments where there was something about how movement affects your brain chemistry and the meaning that we make out of movement, like what it means to reach the top of a hill, or what it means to lift something heavier than you knew you could carry. So it's the brain chemistry, the metaphor, often having a story that we can tell about ourselves that is meaningful and powerful, and that it collides in that moment, this kind of emotional breakthrough. Those were the kinds of stories that, is such a privilege to be able to hear and share.
Yeah. And, my audience has heard me do a lot of interviews. There's a secret group of fat and ex-fat guys called the Missing Chins Run Club, whom I made friends with through my writing partner, Josh Lajani, who used to be 420 pounds from the bayou of Louisiana. And he discovered plants and running, was on the Rich Roll podcast in 2013. And he felt like Rich gave him a mandate to share his story because he was 2 years ago on the cover of Runner's World magazine. And so this group, and you talk a lot about in the endurance chapter of the book, like the value of endurance running, and all the lives that have been saved and the transcendent experiences, and the people in this group writing about their depression, writing about these terrible tragedies that have overwhelmed them in their lives, and the solace they find on the long runs and the camaraderie.
Yes. Yes. And that this was true. I heard stories like this, both for people who were struggling to run their first 5K, as well as people who were training for a 50K. So it's about starting where you are and experiencing yourself as someone who can persist and can endure. And the thing that came through in so many stories, it was especially remarkable in the ultra endurance world because I didn't expect it, because I didn't know as much about that community. But at every level of experience and every level of sort of athleticism, people would talk about the way that they felt supported by other people in their community, people who ran with them or walked with them or were in their dance classes with them, and also how they had an opportunity to support others, that it's a real expression of interdependence. And I mentioned, one of the things I study is how do we develop compassion for ourselves and others. And I'm always saying to people that compassion is not a do-it-yourself project. Like it's not you give it all to other people. You're the source of it. You have to help others and care about others. And it's also self-compassion is not do it yourself. It's not like, all right, toughen up. You're suffering. Okay, so be kind to yourself and, go resolve your suffering on your own. That's self-compassion. That true compassion is about being able to witness and see when other people need help and to have the courage to help them and to take joy in that. And the same is true when you need help, that you have the courage to ask for help and to accept it and can even find some joy in relying on others. And that was the theme that came through so loud and clear when I talked to the endurance athletes, because as they would say to me, like, it's possible to run a marathon on your own. It's not really possible to run an ultra marathon on your own. At some point, you're going to need help. And at some point, you will have the opportunity to help others. And that being able to experience that part of their humanity was as important or more important than knowing that they were somebody who could physically push through discomfort and push through fatigue, that they discovered their inner strength, but they also discovered the role of community and what was available to them.
Yeah, it's like, reading the stories in your book and then, thinking about what I know and what I've experienced as an ultra runner myself. It's almost the difference between like reading a book about, the unity of all being and taking shrooms and like going there and going, oh, like, yeah, like this is obvious. Like it's in my cells now. It's not just an intellectual construct.
I think that's a great parallel for a number of reasons. Not that I actually have not taken entheogens, so I can't speak from personal experience, although I hear from the research that it's a very promising way to experience deep psychological transformation. So one of the things that I think is so important about movement is that it is an embodied experience that is hard to argue with. And so we talked about a couple of those, but also that you can experience tremendous joy and a sense of connection to others, or that being out in nature, hiking or swimming or cycling, that you can experience a sense of yourself as connected to life itself, to nature and to the universe in a way that sounds kind of like woo-woo until you're having the direct experience of it, because there's something about the environment and the movement that allows you to have that experience, to see things differently, to have your senses turned on in a different way. And in the chapter on why exercising in nature is so important for so many people, I actually compare it directly to entheogens like mushrooms or LSD or ayahuasca, because they seem to have a similar effect on the brain as exercising outdoors, just sort of like, compounded in a much more extreme way and sometimes unpredictable way. But that being in nature can open you up to the same kind of psychological insights and sense of connection to the universe, these amazing spiritual experiences that people report while taking these consciousness altering drugs.
Yeah, and I mentioned earlier, like I was really like joyfully surprised at this latest book, but I was doubly surprised when I was reading it to discover that it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. Sort of like another, John Rady Spark, sort of the latest research on how exercise can improve your mood and productivity, but went into these much deeper and personal and murkier qualities. On the cover you talk about how exercise can help us find happiness, hope, connection, and courage. And at the same time as I was getting blown away by a lot of the science, there was also this part of me going, well, duh, this is like Kelly just wrote a book on like why oxygen is important.
Yeah.
It's insane that we even have to talk about like why, like, oh, being embodied is a good thing.
Yeah. And I think, so one of the challenges when writing about science like this is you really don't want to come across as a scold. I mean, you could write a book that's like, exercise can prevent dementia, exercise can prevent heart attacks, and here's, 1,000 scientific reasons why. And I wanted to write something that was more like a love letter, and that people who have had experiences like what we're talking about can feel affirmed in their own direct experience, or if they need to explain to someone else why running or swimming or yoga or dancing is so important to them. Like, here's a book that says, you think CrossFit is just about, being a tough, whatever. Well, read these stories about this reverend who uses CrossFit as part of her ministry and how it changes lives. Like, this is real and this is meaningful. So that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, and why it is not just a list of 100 ways that exercise can change your brain for the better. And the other thing is that I actually feel like the science itself, the science that I wanted to write about in this book, was the science that filled me with wonder and hope itself. And so, when I was sneaking in some of the latest neuroscience, it was things like how your muscles manufacture and release chemicals called hope molecules when you exercise. And like, often I would stumble in the science on language that was almost poetry, describing what I had directly experienced, that exercise can literally be an intravenous dose of hope because of how those molecules make their way through your bloodstream to your brain. Or when I was writing about exercising in nature, coming across this theory called the old friends hypothesis, that bacteria in dirt is an antidepressant and can actually prevent loneliness by reducing inflammation in your brain. Like, loneliness sometimes is not just about not having relationships. It can actually be sort of like a physical symptom, and inflammation can increase the chances that you have trouble connecting with others or feeling a sense of belonging. And that literally there's bacteria in dirt that is so important to your brain that it's an old friend that can reduce symptoms of loneliness. I feel like there's poetry in a lot of the science, and I wanted to share a feeling, not just a fact.
Yeah, it's certainly a love letter, and there were definitely times where I was, damping my eyes. But the other thing, and you mentioned this a little bit on Rich Roll, that, like when you look at your career and the commonalities, like what I wrote down before I heard the interview was that in every single case, you take something that I thought of as like biology is stacked against us because of the mismatch. And you point out the upside of that very same biology. So, we have the impulse to eat as much food as we can, and we also have this willpower instinct in our brains. The stress can kill us, and stress can also enable and ennoble us. And here, like my narrative around movement is, well, we all want to do as little of it as possible because we grew up in the savannah where we had to run and chase every carrot and animal that we were going to eat. And so therefore, our biology is designed to get us to be as lazy as possible, and we have to overcome that in order to get our exercise in. We have to force ourselves into situations where we have to move. And you kind of busted that the same way you did with the other two books, and saying like there are biological imperatives for movement that we can tap into and turn it into like a ride rather than a slog.
Yes. So first of all, let me just thank you for highlighting that. I don't know that I've heard anyone describe my work in quite that way. And I really feel like, part of what I'm trying to do is help us come to terms with the complexity of human nature. And that for each of these topics, like willpower or movement or stress, we have competing instincts. And this is also true with my work on compassion. We have an instinct to protect ourselves or to hate. And we also have instincts to love and support and be brave. And I view my work as helping people understand pragmatically the reality of competing instincts, that humans are not all good and not all bad. You've got all of it inside your body and brain. We are not an accident of, nature, that we come with these adaptations that can support us, whether it's being able to handle stress well by rising to the challenge or connecting with others, or whether it's our ability to override destructive impulses because we have the capacity to predict the future and take care of our future self. And when it comes to movement, the same is true. We do have an instinct to conserve energy. And many of us experience that. Like every day when I wake up and my alarm goes off, I hit snooze every morning. And I think I don't really want to get up and exercise first thing. And then part of me is like, yes, Kelly, you do, because you know how you're going to feel afterwards. And then once I'm actually in the workout, my brain starts rewarding me for moving. That's the competing instinct. Once you're doing it, your brain will reward you for it in so many wonderful ways that boost our mood, that help us feel more optimistic, that help us be more loving. It like exercise changes so much about our brain chemistry to make us a better version of ourselves. But it's that competing instinct. Your brain has to believe you're really doing it. And until you're doing it, your brain will try to convince you not to do it because we have this other instinct to conserve energy. And I think once you understand that, then you can override that impulse, be like, oh, there's my brain conserving energy. It forgets how it's in this moment, it's forgetting how great I'm going to feel and the fact that I've got plenty of food in the fridge. So let's do this. And then, savor the actual experience you have.
Yeah, for me, it's almost like a theological interpretation to say, well, in my natural environment in which I was seeing sunsets and smelling the dirt bacteria and running with my tribe and dancing around the fire, like I would have naturally been a better version of myself. We all would have, like, it's almost like a mythos of the golden age, and we're like we can reclaim it with our steps.
It's really interesting. So one of the things I was cautious about in the first chapter, I write about the Hadza, which is one of the last living hunter-gatherer societies. And when I was talking with people who spent time in that community, they kept saying things like, there's no depression, there's no anxiety, there's no like internal rife and conflict. And I was like, are we just romanticizing this? Is that really the way, like, is that right? Or are we just projecting some fantasies about ancient human nature? But it does seem like there's something about when human beings live in small groups and work cooperatively to support one another and feed one another and have time every day for both work and labor and celebration and storytelling and dancing and singing, that they do seem to be happier and healthier as well, with like no signs of heart disease and other modern epidemics. So I don't want to over romanticize being a hunter, especially being a vegan. Like, yeah. I don't want to go hunt for my food. I'll forage and gather. But there is something to the idea that the human brain seems to have evolved in conditions in which we were pretty active throughout the day, both through labor and through celebration, and that we spent time connecting with one another. That when we're doing those things and you've got music in your day and movement in your day and contributing to your community in your day and social connection, you're a pretty happy, healthy version of yourself.
Yeah, I remember years ago reading an article that the polar bear at the Central Park Zoo was depressed and they couldn't figure out why. Like, seriously?
Oh yeah, right. I know.
When I can't remember if you wrote, I took a note. I don't know if it was from the podcast with Rich Roll or from the book, but they're sort of talking about like genetic sensitivities to things like anxiety and depression. Yeah. And you talk about yourself as yes. sort of, but for me, like that makes zero sense from an evolutionary perspective that we would be wired to anxiety and depression. Feels like
oh, well, let me share with you why.
Good.
Well, as somebody who has, and again, I should say this is a pretty emerging field, so who knows if it's all going to hold up. But there are these genetic variants that are associated with predisposition to a wide range of mental health challenges. And one way that people sometimes talk about it is that it's like a sensitive genotype, that there are people who are predisposed to be really changed by their life experiences. They are particularly affected by stress, by their early relationships with caregivers. They may be very sensitive to threat and vigilant to threat. They also are very responsive to positive experiences and able to learn and grow quickly, as opposed to like other genotypes that are kind of resistant, like they're hardy and it's hard to mess them up, but it's hard to also like really make them change and thrive in new ways. And so, people who have this genetic vulnerability to anxiety and depression often have tremendous strengths when they're able to put themselves in an environment that is supportive of them, where they experience safety and connection and contribution in meaningful ways. They often thrive and make an enormous difference in their community and can have very joyous, meaningful lives. And also, in other circumstances, are more vulnerable and susceptible to things like depression. So I think it's as a genotype to have. You want people who are changed by experience. You want people who are really responsive to the way the world is, because it makes sense that if you're living in a threat-filled environment, you want people who are really sensitive to threat. They are useful to have around, and they might be more likely to survive. So I like to think of my own susceptibilities in that way as being, I am a sensitive, responsive creature who's really capable of change. And so, one of the reasons why I am drawn to psychology is because psychology is a great way to discover like interventions for yourself. If you want to create a life and an environment that brings out the best in you, psychology gives you so much information about what that looks like from a practical, standpoint, especially if you can't change all of the circumstances in your life. But there are ways that you can think and things that you can do to take care of yourself and that sort of thing.
Right. And even just the psychoeducation of saying, oh, this is how I am, this is why I am how I am, and to frame it in terms of that positive. Like, to me, it's sort of like you want most of your savings in like blue chip stocks and bonds, but you want to have some more risky, right? So you want to have a balanced portfolio. Like any society that wants to survive doesn't just want to have the stolid middle.
And by the way, these sensitivities that I mentioned are also linked to greater empathy. And so, it's a human strength that can come with also some human vulnerability. And I think a lot of human strengths are like that there is sometimes what looks like a cost, but that also is, comes in the form of a gift, either to yourself or to your community.
Right. So one of the chapters I loved the best, I think, was the first one about the collective joy. And
yes, chapter 3.
Yeah, I had read The Rubber Arm Illusion in another context, but I
used to teach that in Psych 1. It really works, by the way. I spent so much time pilot testing that with different people. People have different susceptibilities to it. It's phenomenal when you have people who are particularly susceptible to it and they like scream and like jump up.
So can you describe what it is, and then how that,
and why it's interesting,
and why that's interesting in the context of shared movement?
Okay, so if you're listening to this, try to imagine that you are in a psychology study and they sit you down at a desk and ask you to place both of your elbows and your forearms on the desk. And then you are going to take your right arm and lower it underneath the desk so you can no longer see it. And the experimenter is going to put a rubber arm that looks like your arm where your right arm used to be. So if you were to look down at your desk, you would see your own left arm for real sitting on the desk. And you would see what sort of looks like your right arm on the desk, but it's actually a fake rubber arm. And you can't see your own right arm anymore. Then the experimenter is going to take something like a paintbrush and start stroking the rubber arm while asking you to look at it. And because of the way that sensations merge in our brain when they arrive at the same time, you will see the psychologist sort of painting your arm. And the secret trick to this is at the very same time, they've got another paintbrush underneath the table and they're stroking your real arm. And if they do that at the same time so that you get the sensation in your real arm, but what you're seeing is the rubber arm getting stroked, you will start to believe that the rubber arm is your arm. And even though you know it's fake, you look at it and it feels like an extension of your body. And then as I write about, sort of the joke is, the experimenter could then pick up a pair of scissors and stab the rubber arm, and people will scream, like push back from the table because their brain is convinced it's their real arm. So this might seem like just an interesting little neurological trick, but this is one way to think about why when you move in synchrony with others, you feel so close and connected to them. And the idea is that, like, let's say you go to a yoga class and everyone is doing sun salutations together. And so when you reach your arms overhead and inhale, you can see through your peripheral vision and maybe the mirror, everyone in the room lifting their arms overhead and inhaling. This happens in a dance class. It can happen at a sporting event when like everyone is doing some sort of movement that they're coaching you through, like the wave. That when you sense yourself moving in synchrony with other people and you see their movements coinciding at the same time as you sense your own movement, your own arm stretching overhead, your own breath inhaling, you start to perceive everyone else as an extension of your own body, like they are the rubber arm. And this can sound like strange, except when you're actually in it, what it feels like is this kind of joyful, hopeful, confident sense of an expanded self. Like yourself takes up more space and it's connected to other people. It's one of my favorite joys of movement. It's one of the reasons why I have taught flow yoga and dance as my primary forms of movement, because those are the ones in my experience where it's easiest to feel collective joy and to get that kind of transcendent sense of connection to others.
Yeah, and you wrote, I quoted this, knowing the expanded sense of self is essentially a knowing that you have a right to take up space in the world. And
that's part of it.
I actually started crying at that, at the tragedy that we don't feel like no other animal, like I would imagine, worries about this, like from earthworms to dogs to antelope, but humans are like, it's so common, like, oh, I don't want to take up space, I don't want to bother anyone, and you can see it in our postures.
And it's both physical and also, metaphorical. I mean, to be fair, there are many people who live life being shamed by others because of the size of their bodies, like you take up too much space, or because they're a woman or a member of some other group that in a particular setting is not valued. And so the idea is, why are you talking? You're too young. You're female, whatever. We don't want to hear from you right now. So a lot of people can have experiences in their lives where they feel like they're being told you don't have permission to take up space. You don't have a voice. And movement is one of the ways that people often first feel that kind of embodied confidence that says, I do have the right to take up space. I am powerful. I belong here. And then that can transfer into other meaningful areas of your life.
Yeah. And, partly like the rubber arm illusion is an illusion, right? It's a trick that your brain can play on you. I'm not sure that the expanded sense of self in a yoga class is an illusion.
Thank you for saying that. I agree with you. It's similar to, in the nature chapter where I write about the woman who feels connected to her son who died of cancer. I don't think that's a neurological trick either. And I think one of the great things about movement and sometimes the environment we find ourselves in is it allows us to perceive things that are true, but intellectually, like it's you can't really think your way into them. You have to allow your brain to shift into a state where you're able to perceive them and feel them.
Yeah. And my first experience with this is like, I'm not big on yoga classes, and I want to ask you about that. Like I feel like rebelling whenever I see people doing anything in unison. I was going to say in lockstep, which is already indicative of my bias. But I was introduced to yoga through, I don't know if you remember this tape or came across it, the Ali McGraw.
Of course, with Eric Schiffman.
Eric Schiffman.
He was one of my early teachers. Yes, I love Eric.
So
go ahead.
So just this is the only tape I had. So you can imagine, I'd memorized it. And at one point, we're coming out of like some sort of triangle thing, and our arms are up and we're raising up. And he says, now take up the space that you now are. And I got the shivers, like, oh, like that's, again, it's not just words now. And I would kind of draw back on that, the memory of that sensation when I needed to be bigger in life.
I would love to share, since you mentioned, I mean, you defined the tape by the celebrity who starred in it, but can I mention something I learned from Eric Schiffman that has really informed my teaching? So when I was in my early to mid 20s, I remember being at a yoga conference where he was doing some intensive, and I was right up front trying to be the good student. And, I worked really hard on my poses and all of that. And the woman who was next to me was a really crowded intensive. There was something, she was clearly struggling, and I'm not sure how, whether it was mental health challenges, maybe developmental delays. She was having real issues with a lot of things going on, with sort of speaking, out of turn and spilling stuff all over the place. And it was the kind of thing where you could imagine a teacher being a little bit frustrated or annoyed that this woman was taking up so much space in class and making so much noise and making a mess that had to be cleaned up. And I, of course, was on my mat next to me thinking like, well, I'm the good student and that's the bad student. And I don't know what I expected Eric to do, but what I remember is he was so kind. He was so generous to her. He just made more space. I'm like choking up thinking about this. He made more space for her and whatever was present with her and how she was showing up in the class. And I felt very chastened watching that. And it was a very important lesson for me in what it really means to be a teacher, and to lead community-based movement experiences. And I'm so grateful I had a chance to see that when I had only been, teaching for a couple of years, and to have that. I feel like, what a lot of what we've been talking about is the positive benefits of movement on your sense of belonging, your sense of self, your inner strength. And we also need coaches and instructors who allow for that and don't allow movement experiences to devolve into, feel guilty about that thing you ate last night. Well, here's how we're going to burn it off. Or if you don't know the choreography, you need to be in the back row. I mean, there's a lot of ways movement experiences can be demeaning or demoralizing. And I've had a lot of movement instructors who have shown me what it looks like to be empowering. I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, and I've, Eric has had a big influence on my life through that tape. So if you're in touch, you can relay my gratitude. And it's especially poignant because, yoga in particular is a space in which there's an awful lot of bad behavior by the people that we look up to. A friend of mine was doing programming for one of the big institutions that does, retreats and yoga and things like that. And so she was surprised so often that these superstars of the new age would come in and just be jerks.
It's one of the reasons I stopped teaching yoga retreats and at yoga conferences. I really stepped back from that public part of myself. I used to be much more public facing in the yoga world. And it was a difficult thing to watch. It definitely, that there was a lot of really inappropriate stuff going on. And I decided I wanted to focus on just having positive experiences in my own life and in my local community and creating those spaces where people felt safe and supported.
Right. Which I guess brings me to another question. So, and this came up originally for me. A while back, I interviewed Stephen Porges, the polyvagal theory guy, and he was talking about sound and how it can be. Well, it's probably a different place from where you. Well, tell me.
Well, no. So I'm familiar with his work. So I think about he's done some amazing work looking at how. A couple of ways. I'm just going I don't know what you were going to say, but let me tell you what I love about it.
Good, because this is going to be better.
So he's really interested in the physiology of safety and social connection, and stress. And one of the things that he's looked at is how different sounds can support us in shifting into a state of the nervous system that allows us to connect with others, that makes us feel safe, but not like in a cocooned way, but in an open way. And so some of his work has looked at how there's certain sounds, certain soothing sounds of a human voice when a voice is at a particular pitch or a particular cadence. Certain musical sounds can induce a state of social safety and then openness to social connection. And in thinking in terms of yoga, what that made me think of is he's looked at some sort of chanting and other things other sounding practices that can do that. But the other side of that I thought was so fascinating, I learned from him and some other people who've studied how different stress states affect our nervous system, is that certain stress states actually alter our brain's ability to listen to human voices, that there are shifts that happen in your brain, and I believe even in your inner ear, that makes it harder to connect human to human and to voice and to listening. And that there are other stress states, like what I would refer to as a tend and befriend state, that actually allow you to perceive and receive human voices in a more open way. I think that's fascinating. And and this is not necessarily about movement, but it's part of this idea that when you alter your physiology, you are changing who you are in that moment and what you're capable of. And so while he's written a lot about meditation, breathing techniques, sounding that can do that, what I am so fascinated by is that exercise seems to be one of those neurochemical states that enhances our ability to connect with others and makes us more receptive to every part of social connection.
Right. And I guess, from his polyvagal theory, I love how he, doesn't break it down into either relaxed or stressed, but a kind of a different matrix of, mobilization with or without, with fear, or immobilization, or mobilization with social connection, with engagement. And so for me, a lot of people come to me, for help with their weight, with their health. And I see immediately they're in a state of dissociation, of fold. Mm-hmm. I'll ask them, where do you feel this in your body? And they don't know what I'm talking about. And physical movement is almost like, let's ramp it up. And, so now they're sort of stressed a little bit, right? They're doing some exercise-based hormesis. They're pumping the adrenaline. But the way you describe this, these bigger contexts in which we can move, we're not running from the saber-toothed tiger, we're dancing with our community, brings in that social engagement.
Yes, absolutely. And I feel like, so I love that you talk about exercise as being a form of good stress. And it's so fascinating how exercise acts as a stressor. It is different than other forms of stress, even at the biochemical level. So one of the things that you'll see is during exercise, there's an increase in pro-inflammatory chemicals in your bloodstream. And people have often taken that as a negative sign, oh no, those inflammatory chemicals, that's a sign of bad stress and you have to get rid of them. But actually the research suggests that the inflammatory chemicals that are produced during exercise are functionally different, and they actually reduce inflammation, which is that there's something about the chemicals that get pushed out into your bloodstream when you exercise as a form of stress that is functionally has the opposite effect on your health as the inflammatory chemicals that are pumped out into your bloodstream when you're feeling really angry at someone. And I think that you don't have to understand the technicalities of that, but what I want people to appreciate is that is exercise. There's something kind of miraculous about the physical, biochemistry of it that I have not seen in my research anything else you can do that promotes physical and mental health at every level of your existence, every cell, everything that's in your bloodstream, everything that's happening in your brain. It goes so deep.
Right. So I was, I think my favorite study was the rubber arm. My second favorite study that you cite was that when you smell happy sweat, it elevates your mood.
Yes. So it's so fascinating, right? If you get people to be angry and sweat, and you take their t-shirt and put that away, and then you have people who are really happy while they're sweating, let's say they're dancing in a nightclub with their friends, living their best life, and then you put that t-shirt aside, and then you have people come in later and smell the sweat. People like the happy sweat smell better than the angry sweat or the scared sweat. And it improves their mood. So that the state of mind that we're in changes the way we smell because it's changing the molecules in our bloodstream. It's changing the molecules that we are releasing through sweat. And I think this has some very practical implications for exercise. You should look for places where people are happy to be working out. You should work out with people who can find some joy in what they're doing. You should maybe listen to music or exercise in places where the music is so positive that it's boosting people's mood, rather than maybe so aggressive that the sweat is going to increase your sense of hostility or anger. But also this idea that sometimes working out in public places can be an even stronger mood boost than working out by yourself. Because if you're in a place where people are moving joyfully, you can literally catch their joy by inhaling their sweat.
Right. So that brings me to the chapter you didn't write that I wanted you to. So
I wonder if it's the chapter that I tried to write and I abandoned.
What was it?
I tried to write a chapter on play and sports, and my reporting for it was such a disaster show. I thought the universe, so I the examples in my book, the organizations, the individual stories. I would often get a tip or I'd stumble across someone online and I'd connect with them, and it was perfect and it was inspiring. And when I was trying to write the chapter on recreational sports, not competitive sports, not professional sports, every single time I tried to show up, it would be oh, the other team didn't show up for the final, so we're just all going to go home. I was wait, what? And you're not even going to stay and play or go out for drinks. every single reporting step I took, it was like sand through my fingers. And I thought, I don't have the nose for this, that this is, I can't write the chapter that needs to be written for this. And so sadly, there's no chapter in the book about recreational sports, even though I believe that that is a form of joy of movement that is as hardwired in our human instincts as the joys that I write about. So I apologize to anyone who wanted the chapter on sports. I believe in it. I just couldn't report it. So what was the chapter you wanted?
Well, before I tell you, I was curious because we first said play. My mind went somewhere else a little bit in terms of like, learning definitions of play. Because I'm very interested in this idea of competition and where it goes sour and where it's a natural thing. So interesting that's not for you to write.
Yeah. Was that the chapter you wanted on competition?
No.
Okay.
I wanted a chapter on martial arts.
Oh, yeah. So I didn't actually do chapters by sport, but by what I viewed as the human instinct that it brings out.
Right. So
my stories of martial arts are sort of filtered in like the boxing chapter, or not the boxing chapter, but one of the main activities I talk about in the chapter on overcoming obstacles and finding courage and hope were what I think of as like a boxing gym for people with physical disabilities and challenges.
Right. So
so tell me what you love about martial arts.
Yeah. So what I thought about was like you had a chapter on endurance, which is endurance sports. You had a chapter about being in nature, and to me, martial arts is it's a way to bring out the stress response in very carefully measured doses, so that you're growing resilience. So the person that you're competing with is in some sense your mortal enemy. Like that's a really deep thing. Like humans are runners, we're dancers, we're also fighters.
Yes. And
so this, like the martial art I do is called Systema. It's a Russian form and it's very neurologically based. And so I find myself sparring with someone or playing with a partner, and I'll go into fight or flight, or I'll go into rage and learn how to manage that, or to manage the physical pain and the emotional embarrassment of being dominated by someone, or the embarrassment of working with someone that I'm better than and dominating them. Like there's a lot of mystery for me around that, and it feels as primal as running.
I think that is really intriguing. I talked to some folks who were really into martial arts, and it's I drew out of them different themes than what you're describing, probably because of who I am. So like, a woman talking about the primal joy of getting to be aggressive, or the man who shared with me how his martial arts, the place where he practiced felt like home to him, that it was a place where he had shown up so many times to move with others, and that there was that sense of belonging. I think that what you described is such an interesting psychological dynamic. And it's one of the funny things is when you write a book, this is true with any sort of reporting, unless you are the world's most objective journalist, is you give people permission, I think often to share the things that are really resonant with you. And so I wrote a book that in a way is a reflection of the things that I've experienced. And maybe you should write the version of the book, because it's a really interesting theme. And you're right, I didn't draw that out of people. And there could be a whole book that looks at the joys of movement in terms of how movement helps us deal with dynamics around dominance and difficult inner emotions, and these sort of primal instincts to survive, and also be a version of ourselves that does that in like heroic and noble ways rather than destructive ways.
Right. Because I was also thinking about, because you were talking about like the power of group movement. So my mind immediately went to the haka of the New Zealand All Blacks rugby team.
Oh, I know. I had that. That was in a version of the book too. I got exposed to that through Les Mills, which is a group fitness program based in New Zealand, and they have they integrate some of those ideas in their training of group fitness instructors to bring some of those elements in, so that people have, it's not the same experience, but it has some of that power.
Yeah, because I was thinking about it, not just in terms of the New Zealand players, but very often when they televise the games, they'll show, the English team watching and looking, and you look at their eyes and you see like who of them are afraid, who are up for the challenge. Like there's a
Right. Well, I wrote in that book about collective joy, this idea that when people move in synchrony, they are perceived by others as being more formidable, of being stronger, of being a more powerful opponent. And so it's one of the reasons why people move together, in order to develop their own sense of confidence as a team or as a community. And you see that both in things like, how teams can move together before a athletic event, but also when people come together to do something like a race for a cure, that they actually end up, or marching for a protest, they end up feeling that collective strength, and that allows them to sense their own power for whatever their higher purpose is.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say around the Stephen Porges stuff with sound, where he was talking to me about like those natural impulses can be hijacked, like by putting people in a cathedral and manipulating them so they're in just enough fear because of the oral tones. And I was also thinking, like, and this will tell you like where my mental emotional proclivities go. I was thinking about like Triumph of the Will and the video of like the Hitlerian parades that are also bringing thousands of people together in synchronized movements, but in very dark ways.
I mean, this is like that theme that we started with, this idea that human beings, for every instinct that seems admirable or pro-social, there is a competing instinct that often can be destructive, or the same instinct can be used for both positive and negative purposes. And this is why, like, we didn't talk about this, one of the other things that is really important in my work is I try to focus people on core values that really bring meaning to their own lives, and that also have some sort of positive sense of contribution connected to the more noble aspects of human nature. Because I think if you aren't clear about that commitment to maybe pro-social values, you can have very powerful experiences that can bring out the worst in you if you don't wake up in the morning and say to yourself, I'm committing to honesty, integrity, kindness, whatever it is.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I know you have to go in just a couple of minutes because you just texted me that you do. So I wanted to end with like the thing that like I share as soon as I finished reading the book. I shared it with the Missing Chins and said like, this is Roberta Flack singing our lives with her story. And the thing that I love I think the best is that you keep coming back to this idea of the experience of pride, of self-esteem, of doing something hard. And because like, especially from the willpower instinct, you're very well versed in sort of behavioral theory, behavioral economics. And there's this whole like future discounting thing, right? Present bias, where that's the problem, that I want to lose weight and be a hunk tomorrow, but I don't want to exercise today because it hurts and it sucks. And I love how you show that hurting today can be pleasurable today.
Yes. And that's so important when it comes to something like exercise. If you are thinking of exercise in terms of a punishment for what you ate, or because the body you have now is unacceptable in some way, you are basically tying that difficult experience to difficult emotions like shame or fear or self-anger or regret. And you need to tie that doing something hard to something positive. Like, you have to. And so I'm always encouraging people to find the actual joy in the movement itself, to appreciate what your body can do, to be overwhelmed by your own capacity to do difficult things that are in your best interest, that are an investment in your health and your happiness, to take joy in seeing other people working hard, to let yourself be inspired by seeing other people push through discomfort or change and grow and have personal bests. There are a lot of positive things you can experience in movement. There are ways to think about movement that enhance your sense of pride and gratitude and hope, and to really try to cultivate that mindset, because it literally transforms the experience you have. There's one of the studies I write about in the book was they actually just asked people to talk out loud while they were on a treadmill and to say what they were thinking. And the athletes who would notice that they were getting tired and think to themselves, wow, this is a sign that I'm actually doing something that's going to make me stronger. they were more likely to enjoy the workout and want to work out again than people who interpreted those same physical symptoms as, I'm so out of shape, I can't do this, or I'm embarrassed that I'm sweating. And so, often we have a little bit of self-coaching to do so that we can remember to have those experiences of pride and gratitude and hope in an experience where there may be other messages we've been fed that could push us in the other direction.
I love it. I love it. So you got to go in a minute. There are so many more things that I would have wanted to ask you about, but people can get the book, The Joy of Movement. And if they want to follow you, where do they go?
First of all, just looking up The Joy of Movement might be easier than spelling my name, but you can find me at kellymcgonigal.com and on all social media channels as Kelly McGonigal.
Well, thank you so much for all the work you have done. Everything you have written has improved my life in a clear and measurable way. And so it's an honor to finally get to talk to you and to thank you for that. And thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you.
All right. I hope you're ready to get moving after listening to that wonderful explanation of why movement is so good for us and why it makes us human. Maybe you moved while you were listening to it. If so, awesome. How do you feel? If you want more information about all things Kelly McGonigal, check out the show notes for this episode at plantyourself.com/364. I've got links to all her books and a bunch of the other stuff that we talked about in our conversation. If you like this episode and you want to share it with other people, I say go for it. In fact, why not tell one person about this podcast? If everybody does that, I would, let me do the math. Those little sound effects of my solar-powered Casio. Double listenership. And doubling listenership would mean that Apple would rate it higher. It would go up to the top of my category, and more people would find out about it, and we could spread the word. I know this is sort of grade grubbing for podcasters, but I can't help wanting to have more influence. As I've gotten clearer about my goals here, it's not to play small. It's not to stay quiet. And so if you feel like that's a worthwhile thing for Plant Yourself and for me to be doing, just sharing it out there, sending an email to someone saying, hey, I think you'd enjoy this. Have you heard of this? Would be a great favor to me and hopefully to them as well. If you also would like to support the podcast in other ways, you can leave a review. I need more reviews. I got a silly review from someone, and it's up. It's the third one on my website. One more review will knock it off, and that would be great. Just go to Apple, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, whatever it is, and just let folks know what you think of this podcast. That also helps it rise in the rankings. So if presumably if you're listening this far, you don't think it's complete crap and you're willing to help me with that. What else we have going on? A bunch of great conversations coming up. Carolyn Raffensperger next week, one of the most important environmental advocates in the United States of the last 30 years, I would say, and most people haven't heard of her, and she kind of likes it that way, but we're blowing her cover next week on the podcast. She is the brains behind, or the heart behind, the precautionary principle, a way of assessing and litigating and making public policy that balances environment and the needs of people and economies. In garden news, we still have a couple of Napa cabbages, but other than that, we're just into planning and looking for seeds and ideas for next year. In running news, I still was mostly out, but I did a run on Sunday that I was going to be sort of do a walkish thing, and then a guy ran past my house, and he was going at a good clip, and he had a Nathan vest on and Hoka running shoes, and I didn't know who this person was. And I very rarely see runners on my road, so I just had to catch up to him and run with him for about 7 miles and have a great conversation. And so I feel like I'm back in the saddle at least a little bit. All right, thanks. Thanks to Will Ridenhour for allowing me to use Sabali Don, the Dance of Peace, as the theme music for this show. Check out willridenhour.com for more of his gorgeous West African kora music. And thanks to all of you Plant Yourself podcast patrons. Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Anthony Disson, Brittany Porter, Dominic Mara, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hadley, Mary Jane Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Melissa Cobb, Rachel Burns, Christine Nielsen, Tina Sharp, Dina Ahern, Jan Volkanovsky, David Bizek, The Mysterious, Michelle X, Elspeth Feldman, Leah Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colin Peck, Michelle Landry, Josina, Sarah Durkis, Rhymes with Circus, Kelly Cameron, Wayne Pedersen, Janet Selby, Claire Adams, Tom Franzik, Jeanette Bellin, Gil Lestert, David Donahue, Blair Seibert, Dorona Vizov, Gio and Carolyn Argentati, Jody Friesner, Ruth Ann Funderburk, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck, The Equally Mysterious, Tracy Z, Aviva Lael, Alicia Lemus, Rebecca Hughes, Val Linneman, Rhymes with Cinnamon, Nick Harper, Martha Bergner, Susan Ahmad, Molly Levine, The Inscrutable, Harry R., Susan Laverty, The Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Scharf, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Kelly Machia, Deanne Norton, Bonnie Lynch of Plant Happy Oregon, Sabina Kurtzels, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Copel, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Shannon Hirschman, Linda Ayat, Holm Hedegaard, Isa Tuzanwa, Connie Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jensen, Sherry Orlikoski of Plant Powered for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Morani, Karen and Joe Crabtree, Tanya Lewis, Kirby Burton, Teresa Krell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, Ann Jesse, Cheryl Dwyer, Jenny Hazelton, Valerie Peltier, P.W. Evans, Colleen Harrison, Justin Divitt, Joshua Sommermeyer, Dennis Bird, Darby Kelly, Lori Fanny, Linnea Lundquist, Valerie Hummel, Emily Iaconelli, Levy Wallach, Rosamund McAtee, Dan Picorni, Stephen Leenan, Patty DiMartino, Mike and Donna Kartz, Deanne Bishop, Bill Brielf, Gunter Schmidt, Marjorie Lewis, Kelly Molden, Tricia Adams, Ian Kramer, Nancy Sheldon, Lindsay Bayshore, Gunmarie Hagan, Tracy Gullers, Laura Heaton, Meg from Mama Says, Rochelle Kennedy, Diana Goldman, Stacey Stokes, Ben Savage, Michael Kay, Holly Butler, David Hughes, Connie Rogers, Claire England, Sally Robertson, Parham Ganshi, Amy Daly, Brian Tourville, Mark Jeffrey Johnson, Josie Dempsey, and Karen Schmidt for your generous support of the podcast. Congratulations to Ian Kramer for making it into the Forks Over Knives magazine this month. Way to go, Ian. And that's it for this week. No, it's not it for this week. That's it for this episode. We got another one coming on Friday, the fertilizer. Find yourself fertilizer on Friday. As always, be well, my friends. So if you appreciate the Plant Yourself podcast and would like to help support the mission of the show, there's a few easy ways to do it. One is to just go to wherever you get your podcasts and leave a review. Let other people know about it. Give us some stars. Give us some love. And that really helps us be found by more people. Something else, of course, you can do is let someone know about this podcast. Someone who you think would benefit. Send them maybe a couple of episodes that you think would pique their interest, or just ask them to subscribe in general. And third, you can join arms and become a patron, a financial supporter of this show. You may have noticed that there's no advertising in the show, and it's free for everyone, and it's supported, paid for by those who can afford it. So if you would like to make a one-time contribution or an ongoing monthly pledge, you can do so at plantyourself.com/gift. All right, time for thanks. Thanks to Will Ridenauer for allowing me to use his beautiful song, Sabali Dawn, The Dance of Peace. You can find more of Will's music at his website, willridenauer.com. And of course, thanks to all of you Plant Yourself podcast patrons. Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Anthony Disson, Brittany Porter, Dominic Maurer, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hatherley, Mary Jean Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Melissa Cobb, Rachel Behrens, Christine Nielsen, Tina Sharp, Tina Ahern, Jen Volkanovsky, David Bizek, The Mysterious, Michelle X, Elspeth Feldman, Leah Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Andrews, Josina, Sarah Durkis, Rhymes with Circus, Kelly Cameron, Wayne Pedersen, Janet Selby, Claire Adams, Tom Franzik, Jeanette Benham, Gil Lestert, David Donahue, Blair Seibert, Dorona Vizov, Gio and Carol Argentati, Jody Friesner, Ruth Ann Funderburk, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck, The Equally Mysterious, Tracy Z, Aviva Lael, Alicia Lemus, Rebecca Hughes, Val Linneman, Rhymes with Cinnamon, Nick Harper, and Martha Bergner, Susan Ahmad, Molly Levine, The Inscrutable, Harry R., Susan Laverty, The Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Scharf, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Kelly Machia, Deanne Norton, Bonnie Lynch of Plant Happy Oregon, Sabina Kurtzels, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Copel, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Shannon Hirschman, Linda Ayat, Holm Hedegaard, Isa Tuzanwa, Connie Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jensen, Sherry Orlikoski of Plant Powered for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Morani, Karen and Joe Crabtree, Tanya Lewis, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, Ann Jesse, Cheryl Dwyer, Jenny Hazelton, Valerie Peltier, Peter W. Evans, Colleen Harrison, Justine Divitt, Joshua Sommermeyer, Dennis Bird, Darby Kelly, Lori Fanny, Linnea Lundquist, Valerie Hummel, Emily Iaconelli, Levy Wallach, Rosamund McAtee, Dan McCorney, Stephen Leenan, Patty DiMartino, Mike and Donna Kartz, Deanne Bishop, Bill Brielf, Gunter Schmidt, Marjorie Lewis, Kelly Molden, Tricia Adams, Ian Kramer, Nancy Sheldon, Lindsay Bayshore, Gunmarie Hagan, Tracy Gullers, Laura Heaton, Meg from Mama Says, Rochelle Kennedy, Diana Goldman, Stacey Stokes, Ben Savage, Michael Kay, Holly Butler, David Hughes, Connie Rogers, Claire England, Sally Robertson, Parham Ganshi, Amy Daly, Brian Tourville, Mark Jeffrey Johnson, Josie Dempsey, Karen Schmidt, Pamela Hayden, Emily Perryman, Olga Sidorowska, Allison Corbett, Richard Stone, Lauren Vaught of Edible Musings, Aaron Hasty, Sean Owen, Sagar Nayak, Erica Piedra, and Danielle Roberts for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for today. As always, be well, my friends.